Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'll be giving my take on yesterday's PMQs, in which Angela Rayner was deputising for Labour as a result of Keir Starmer's COVID positive test, and asking questions about Tory sleaze and the tax cuts for banks at the same time as tax rises for ordinary members of the public. And Ian Blackford for the SNP tackled Johnson on his government's refusal to get serious about the Scottish Government's plans for carbon capture. But I'm going to talk exclusively about the shameful display of Tory sleaze in this video. And even that's going to take longer than normal. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So there were three big issues there. But Rayner's first is the most politically charged. I would normally take a look at the theme of all of the questions in some form from both Labour and the SNP. And it's not like the other issues are less important. Like, some people could easily argue they're more important in some ways, but I've talked about tax inequality of the budget already and will inevitably do so again at some point. Likewise, I'll be offering up my own thoughts on Johnson's words and actions over climate change at the end of COP26 proper, when the dust has settled, but more because I want to really talk about this situation concerning the government's defence of one of their MPs caught red-handed with his fingers in the till. I really want to talk mostly about this issue rather than the specific to and fro from PMQs. But if you would like to keep yourself up to date with the debunking of the lies that Johnson spewed on his so-called record in Parliament, I'll just post a link in the description below to Peter Stevanovich's concise video on it in the description below. So Owen Paterson, a Conservative MP, has been found to have abused taxpayer funding for his own private lobbying. He's abused his position to profit himself. And the Standards Committee, which includes Conservative MPs, verified his guilt with clear documentary proof. Not evidence, proof. The recommendation was a suspension from the Commons that would have been long enough for him to potentially face a recall. That means he's no longer an MP. Doesn't stop him becoming an MP again, because what would happen is that would trigger a by-election. Now, in theory, you can see why the government would wish to avoid that. As a result of Johnson's government, he's instructed Tory MPs to support a vote on cancelling the suspension pending a review of the whole procedure, trying to blame the procedure. Even they couldn't say that Owen Paterson wasn't guilty. They just said, oh, but the whole procedure used to determine the guilt, maybe we could improve it. They are trying to argue a mistrial, so to speak. I even saw one MP trying to attack the commissioner by suggesting that she was unsuitable. She has a degree, for goodness sake. Clearly unsuitable. What? What? Never mind that the conclusion was not a gut response, but the result of damning documentary evidence. Agreed by MPs across all parties. Some are also trying to claim that Paterson had a load of witnesses who were not allowed to give evidence. Also false. They all provided full written statements. They were just not allowed to present oral contributions. But why would you need to do that when you were allowed to write down everything that you thought was relevant in a written statement that was considered? In fact, it's easier to put everything down in a written statement than oral. You might forget something if you just go in and say stuff. Also pointless. Even if Paterson was recalled, let us say he was recalled, which he probably would have been. It's not certain. It doesn't always happen. He would still be permitted to stand in that by-election. It's a safe Tory seat. He'd have almost certainly won it again. Yes, OK, you can't take anything for granted. The Conservatives have been losing a lot of ground in their traditional seats. But even if the seat were lost, and the swing required would have been ridiculous, he still has a massive majority. Boris Johnson has a huge majority in Parliament. It seems ridiculous to me that the Conservatives are once again giving their opponents easy lines of attack against their refusal to follow the rules that the rest of us are subject to, in order for what? No tangible gain. No strategic gain for the Conservatives, not even to look after one of their own. Owen Paterson would have been back as an MP in no time. And this was Angela Rayner's line of attack. She noted that in no other profession can you be sanctioned for professional misconduct and then get your colleagues to vote you off the hook. Johnson tried to argue that in no other professions you have a right, in other professions rather, you have a right of appeal. In other professions, you are not investigated by your own friends and colleagues. And also the punishment was pathetic. It was going to be 30-day suspension. That was it. Not sacking, not prosecution. This is fraud. He's not going to be prosecuted. Not even going to be sacked. He was just going to have 30-day suspension. Paterson was investigated, the evidence reviewed by close colleagues, and they still found him guilty, including Conservative MPs. This is the government refusing to see one of their own punished. That's all there is to it. No matter how serious the offence. This is Dominic Cummings and Barnard Castle all over again. In fact, it's any number of other ministerial breaches of the code all over again as well. Time and again, when those close to him, those who support him, fail in their moral or professional duties, Johnson backs them because they are one of his own. And they tell us to move on from it. Remember, he only sacked Matt Hancock because Rupert Murdoch forced him to. Rayner also pointed out that when another Conservative MP was found guilty of sexual harassment, he got out of it on a technicality. At the time, the government said, well, those are the rules. We can't just change the rules retroactively, can we? So he was allowed off the hook because of an unfortunate loophole that everyone could see was a loophole. Even the government couldn't defend this person's behaviour, but just said, well, the rules unfortunately allow for this sort of thing. That's unfortunate. But we can't just change the rules and then retroactively apply that punishment. Yet here the Conservatives are now wanting to change the rules retroactively in order to get the result they want. Basically, they just want the result they want and will adapt whatever position gets it. If a rule lets them get what they want, that pesky loophole. Oh, nothing we can do about it. If the rules do not give them what they want, those pesky rules, well, we'd best change them and then rerun the entire process again. Besides, this isn't an appeal. Johnson is telling his MPs to dismantle the Standards Committee, or rather he's told them he's done it now. The latest in a line of times when a body that's independent of government has done something he doesn't like and he just abolishes it. It goes right back to when he prorogued Parliament. He actually prorogued Parliament because he didn't like what it was doing. Just shut Parliament down. You may argue that shutting it down for a bit is not quite abolishing it, but consider what MPs have done with Johnson in charge. They have voted to remove their own right to scrutinise post-Brexit trade deals. They have allowed the government to create new laws, including criminal offences. That's something only Parliament's supposed to do. They have allowed a government minister to stand in the Commons chamber and announce that the government intend to break international law without any consequences. And they are now voting, or have voted, to remove the only committee that has any oversight over the standard of MPs. While Parliament does whatever the government tells it to do, then we have a Parliament in name only. Yes, Parliament often mostly goes along with the government, but that's because the government is chosen from those with the most backing amongst all MPs. Their interests generally align. Obviously, Parliament's going to go along with the government on most things because they're in the same party, they have the same political philosophy. But previous Parliaments would never have gone along with this systematic dismantling of independent bodies or democratic controls. Essentially, what has happened here is Parliament have found Owen Paterson guilty of misconduct. Boris Johnson has told them to cancel that decision. Not because it's wrong, because he doesn't want that decision. Put it another way, the government has told Parliament to correct itself and Parliament has duly obliged. We do not have a parliamentary democracy anymore. We have an authoritarian government with a puppet show Parliament, which is little more than a tourist attraction now. It's not even the only example of this. Boris Johnson wanted Paul Dacre to become the new head of Ofcom, the media watchdog. Parliament said no. They said he's totally unsuitable. So now Johnson is going to run the whole procedure again, with Paul Dacre still allowed to put himself forward, even though he was rejected by Parliament. Basically, if the government don't get the result they want from a particular procedure, they will just force the procedure to run itself again until they do get the result they want. Parliament does not have to take this, but it is doing. So it's no Parliament at all. And I don't wish to disparage the important work that will still continue to be done, like last week's vote to make HRT free in England to follow the policy already existing in Wales and Scotland. That's all it can do now. Work on measures that don't tread on the toes of the government's agenda. Parliament was formed specifically to hold executive power to account. It has existed for over 800 years for that specific purpose. Essentially following on from Magna Carta. There have been battles between Parliament and the executive at various times. Sometimes Parliament has been faced down, but it's never capitulated completely like this. Rayner tried to use the example of Donald Trump, of how breaking the rules caught up with him. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to disagree with her here. She actually put in a very good performance, but that was not the line of attack. It was, has Trump's rules breaking caught up with him? Has it really? In what context? It allowed him to be president for his full term, despite an unprecedented 2 impeachments. His full term. Though insurrection, carried on being president for a few more weeks. You know, he was clearly involved in that, if not actively part of the orchestration. Suffered no ill effects from it. Still isn't suffering any ill effects of it. Yes, he's not president right now, but he still runs the Republican Party. If anything, I would argue that his election loss has bolstered his support. Bolstered it. In a few years' time, he may come back stronger than ever. If all those people, remember, he got a ridiculous number of votes. Biden just got more. There were just more people more desperate to get rid of Trump. What happens in a few years' time if those people those almost record number of people who voted for Trump still vote for Trump, but the ones who voted for Biden get a bit complacent and go, oh, I'm not that keen on Biden actually. He's all right, he's okay, but I'm not that fired up. Well then, you know, and even if Trump doesn't come back, he's still got to grift his way through 4 years at the White House and has not lost anything from his time doing so. That's why parallels like that will do nothing for Tories like Johnson. The intention is to presumably let them feel the hand of history on their shoulder. A warning of dire consequences for their future selves, maybe. But there aren't any on show in America, and they don't believe that there will be any on this side of the Atlantic either. The absolute worst case scenario in the minds of these Tories, and Boris Johnson in particular, is that they're voted out of office before they would like to be. That Boris Johnson has to stop being Prime Minister. But they will still keep their ill-gotten gains. Johnson will usher in a new age of wealth for himself as he signs lucrative book deals and goes on the even more lucrative speech circuit. Telling boorish jokes to a bunch of drunks for money is probably his ideal job, and he will make a fortune from it. Frankly, I'd wish him well. I wholeheartedly support him going around the world saying how great he is for buckets of cash if he would only leave Downing Street to make his fortune and leave us with the broken pieces of our country to pick up. The issue with Owen Paterson is not just about Johnson trying to protect his chums like bad cops covering for their own. It's another tower of our democratic constitution being torn down. He hasn't just told MPs to disregard the result. He's told them to actually destroy that committee. The Standards Committee going to be gone. You know, I'll put a link in the description below of the committee findings should anyone want to read it. It was overturned by a small margin, but they voted. They only needed a majority of 1, of course, but just 10 more Conservative MPs who knew this was wrong. There were many of them who knew this was wrong. Just 10 of them voting against it, and that would have been defeated. Or another 19 abstaining. And this latest piece of democratic accountability would have held firm. But no, not in Johnson's Tory Britain. And I am going to be discussing this further tomorrow. I've got a lot more to say about this. But until then, those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.